Welcome today to another installation of hymns and organ, and we have a number of people participating today. I want to start by forgetting that, not to forget that Adam Payne, Reagan Lale, and Joe Leopard are helping us out with the technology and the video work. Today we have Byron Bean playing some trombone. He'll be playing on the hymns, and we'll have a separate piece with the trombone and the piano in a little while. Bryn Van Allsburg and Hadley Hunt are all playing violin for us. And we have the Rumbaugh Family Singers making their debut. Dr. Ross, Britt, and Ellie. So we'll be telling you what we're doing along the way. It's exciting to have everybody here. And our Rumbaugh Family Singers will give you the rundown of the information on the hymns, and I wanted to thank Kathy Lyday for putting together the PowerPoints, and also Tommy Luckadoo and Russ Perkins, who put together the introductions for our hymns. So we hope you enjoy this, and enjoy these hymns, enjoy all of this performing in this beautiful sanctuary, and enjoy the music.
Our first hymn is In the Garden by C. Austin Miles, written in 1912. Trained to be a pharmacist, C. Austin Miles left that profession early on to work in gospel music. He penned over 500 texts and tunes, spending the majority of his adult life in that endeavor. The inspiration for In the Garden came to Miles in April of 1912. According to the author, he was seated in a dark room in his house. As he picked up his Bible, it opened with no effort or control on his part to his favorite passage, John chapter 20. That is the story of Mary coming to the empty tomb of Jesus on Easter Sunday. In Miles's words, "It was as though I was in a trance as I read it that day. I seemed to be part of the scene. I became a silent witness to that dramatic moment in Mary's life when she knelt before her Lord and cried, 'Rabboni.' Imagine how much greater Mary Magdalene's shock and elation was when Jesus, whom she had seen dead and buried 3 days earlier, suddenly called her by name, and she turned and saw him, very much alive and in person. This hymn elaborates on the emotions she may have felt in that moment when her grief was turned to joy."
This next hymn is called The Old Rugged Cross. A Methodist evangelist, George Bernard, wrote the first verse of The Old Rugged Cross in the fall of 1912 as a response to ridicule he had been subjected to at a revival meeting. He finished the song early the next year. The cross and its meaning for believers are the themes of his hymn. The cross is seen as the emblem of suffering and shame in the first stanza, yet it has a wondrous attraction in the second stanza and a wondrous beauty in the third. Why is such symbol of shame found so attractive? Because it is there that Jesus suffered and died to pardon and sanctify me. The joy that is found in contemplating the cross is not found in the shame, but in the promise that someday the saints will exchange the labor of sanctification for the crown of life.
Samuel Stone, a clergyman of the Church of England, was born in 1839 and died in 1900. He was educated at Pembroke College, Oxford. He served various churches, including one his father had pastored. Stone authored many original hymns and translations. His hymns are hopeful in spirit and skillfully constructed. In the middle of the 19th century, a bishop in the Church of South Africa caused a schism in the church by denouncing much of the Bible as untrue. The bishop was deposed for his actions. When he appealed to higher authorities in the Church of England, Samuel Stone became involved in the debate, and it was inspired to draft a set of hymns based on the Apostles' Creed. He titled it Lyra Fidelium. The work comprised 12 hymns on the 12 articles of the Apostles' Creed. The Church's one foundation is based on the 9th article, the Holy Catholic Church and the Communion of Saints. The complete work contains 10 verses, and the schism is alluded to in several of the verses not found in our version. One of the verses reads in part, "Though with a scornful wonder men see her sore oppressed, by schisms rent asunder, by heresies distressed." Now, in affirmation of Christ as the foundation of our faith, we sing this hymn with those who have gone before us and with Christians around the world, declaring that beyond any theological differences, cultural divides, and variances in practice, we are all part of the same body, the body of Christ.
His toil and tribulation
inspiration for this text came when Carl Boberg was walking home from church in his native Sweden. He had just participated in an afternoon service. A thundercloud appeared on the horizon, and soon lightning flashed across the sky. Strong winds swept over the meadows and billowing fields of grain. The thunder pealed in loud claps. Then rain came in cool, fresh showers. In a little while, the storm was over and a rainbow appeared. When Boberg arrived home, he opened the window and saw the bay of Mesteras, like a mirror before him. From the woods on the other side of the bay, he heard the song of a thrush. The church bells were tolling in the quiet evening. It was this series of sights, sounds, and experiences that inspired the writing of the song. The original work was written in Swedish and then translated to German, then Russian. Stuart Hine, a Methodist missionary from Britain serving in Ukraine, then translated the text from Russian to English. Hine added several verses. His third verse was inspired by the conversion of Russian villagers who cried out to God loudly as they repented and realized God's love and mercy. And when I think that God, his son not sparing, sent him to die, I scarce can take it in. The fourth verse was inspired by displaced Russians who experienced great loss and looked forward to seeing their loved ones again in heaven. When Christ shall come with shout of acclamation to take me home, what joy shall fill my heart? How Great Thou Art was ranked second after Amazing Grace on a list of the favorite hymns of all time in a survey by Christianity Today magazines in 2001.
Amazing Grace. John Newton's acceptance of God was more of a journey than a seminal event. His mother died when he was 6 years old, and by the age 11, his father had him working on a commercial sailing ship. He gained a reputation for recalcitrance, insubordination, and debauchery. He was purported to use such gross profanity that even the ship's captain was offended. He served on his ships involved in the slave trade. In 1748, Newton's ship was caught in a dreadful storm. In the height of the storm, 2 weeks to man a bilge pump, he was tied to the helm so that he would not be washed overboard and could therefore steer the ship on the proper course. He was called out, "If this will not do, then the Lord have mercy upon us." This was the beginning of his salvation. Newton left the shipping in 1755. He began studying Christian theology, married a pious woman, and became involved in the abolition movement. He was ordained in the Church of England in 1764. Newton said of that day at the helm in 1748, "On that day the Lord sent from on high and delivered me out of deep waters." 57 years later, as an old man, Newton wrote in his diary on March 21st, 1805, "Not well able to write, but I endeavor to observe the return of this day with humiliation, prayer, and praise." Only God's amazing grace could and would take a rude, profane, slave-trading sailor and transform him into a child of God. Newton never ceased to stand in awe of God's work in his life. Newton could well have said, as could we all, did he not leave the 99 sheep and go in search of the one? I am that one.
The Lord's Prayer has been set to music countless times, but the version we are most familiar with was completed by Albert Hay Malott in 1935. Albert Malott got his start in the music business as a pianist and organist, earning his keep as an accompanist for the first silent films. He later became a noted Hollywood composer, writing the scores for dozens of films in the 1930s and 40s, mostly comedies, but he also wrote the score for a couple of Disney cartoons. His version of the Lord's Prayer was initially rejected by publishers until it was finally picked up by John Charles Thomas, a popular baritone of the day. The first known recording is by Sarah Vaughan with the Ted Dale Orchestra in 1947. You may have heard others: Andrea Bocelli, Charlotte Church, Jackie Evancho, and hundreds more. Malott also put to music the Beatitudes in the 23rd Psalm.
Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory
Now, with a little change of pace, Byron Bean is going to come down with the piano and the trombone. We're going to do a little Byron version of Down by the Riverside before continuing with the singing.
There's certainly a lot of turmoil in the world these days. Some have compared this era to the late 1960s and early 1970s, a time of great upheaval and unrest. It was against this backdrop that Bill and Gloria Gaither wrote Because He Lives in 1971. Gloria was expecting, and like many parents of this day, they were both concerned about bringing a child into a world in chaos. As Bill Gaither explained, it was in the midst of this kind of uncertainty that the assurance of the lordship of the risen Christ blew across our troubled minds like a cooling breeze in the parched desert. Holding our tiny son in our arms, we were able to write, "How sweet to hold our newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But greater still the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because he lives." The Gaithers have authored more than 700 songs, but this may be their most requested one.
My faith looks up to thee. What does Mary had a little lamb have to do with my faith looks up to thee? Lowell Mason was a composer who lived in Boston. After a stint in the banking business that paid for his music studies, he became the first music teacher in a public school in the United States and was later promoted to music superintendent for the Boston school system. It was during this time that he had set to music the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. He later became deeply involved in the church music and composed more than 1,600 sacred words. Ray Palmer was in Boston as well, teaching school and studying theology. Palmer would later become a pastor, but at the time he was a 22-year-old trying to find his place in the world. He kept a leather bond notebook in his pocket to which he referred often during his meditations. Within that notebook was a poem he had written. Mason and Palmer met by chance one day on the streets of Boston in 1830. Mason shared with Palmer that he was gathering music for a hymnal he hoped to publish and asked Palmer if he had anything he would like to contribute. Palmer shared the poem with him, and that night, Mason set it to music. Mason was so moved by the words that he told Palmer, "You may live many years and do many good things, but I think you will be best known to posterity as the author of My Faith Looks Up to Thee." History was proved him correct.
Fanny Crosby, born in 1820, the most prolific writer of hymns in our country's history, with more than 8,000 credited to her, blind since early childhood. She had several friends who were composers, and often the music inspired her lyrics rather than her writing the lyrics first. That's how Blessed Assurance came to be. One of her friends was Phoebe Knapp, a part-time musician and the wife of the founder of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. During a visit one day in 1873, Mrs. Knapp played a tune she had written and asked Fanny Crosby, "What does this melody say to you?" After a few moments of prayer, Crosby replied, "Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine," and followed by reciting the entire first stanza. It was published the next year and quickly became popular with congregations across the globe. They also collaborated on another hymn, Nearer the Cross.
The words to this hymn were written for a church which prohibited singing during its services. Reginald Heber was first a vicar and later Archbishop for the Church of England, serving both in England and India. He wrote the lyrics to Holy, 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 intending it to be sung on Trinity Sunday, the 8th Sunday after Easter. It was written in the early 1800s, a time during which singing was prohibited in Church of England liturgies. The words are inspired by Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And Revelations chapter 4, verses 2 through 11. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. The hymn was first published a year after Heber's untimely death in 1826, but with a different tune. Composer John Dykes wrote the tune we are familiar with, especially for these lyrics in 1861. Note the continued references to the Trinity throughout the song, including God in three persons, blessed Trinity.